Hi, I'm Father Lance Warren, pastor of Sacred Heart Catholic Church and School in El Reno, and also St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Union City. As we begin this holy season of Lent, most parishes are partaking in the very popular, the very common fundraiser of the Rice Bowl with Catholic relief services. Now, as pastor, I realize how many asks are made of the people of God for financially supporting one thing or another. Believe me, I completely understand. My purpose here today is to tell you about Catholic Relief Services and give you a few stories of what they actually do for the benefit of the people of God overseas. My position with Catholic Relief Services is called a Global Fellow Associate. What that means is every few years or so, and I've only been able to do one trip, is that I travel as part of a delegation to an area where Catholic Relief Services is doing so much work. The whole idea is just to see and experience the great works of CRS, which can all be done thanks in total part to your generosity, and see how we're helping the people of God in some of the most difficult situations and circumstances on the planet. So in January of 2019, I traveled with a group to the nation of Uganda. It's in South Central Africa. Not a quick way to get there, as I found out. To really understand the situation, we have to understand the geography of Uganda. It's mostly landlocked with Lake Victoria on its southern border, surrounded by nations such as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, South Sudan to the north, Kenya to the east, and Rwanda and Tanzania to the south. This is a very interesting part of the world with many different dynamics that we really don't have time to go into. This is where a significant portion of the resources from Catholic Relief Services is currently being invested. Now, to really understand what Catholic Relief Services is doing now, we first have to look back to the very common model of the Catholic youth mission trip. Many young people have done these mission trips over the years, over the past decades. The idea is very simple: sending young, enthusiastic people overseas to do good works for the people of God that are in need, and then come back home. What we're finding now, after many years of research and study, is that this model does not work. And in fact, it hinders much of the growth and development of the people we're seeking to serve. So this is one of the main engines behind Catholic Relief Services' new initiative of changing the way we care. We're stepping back from a model which is unhelpful, which really seeks to foster our own sense of worth and helping others so that we can feel better about ourselves, and really looking and asking those hard questions of how is this actually helping the people of God in whom we wish to serve. And so our trip there, we got to meet up with many of the organizations which are run by locals in the Ugandan community, or some of our long-term employees with Catholic Relief Services from the surrounding nations. The point of some of these programs is that they are self-sufficient and driven from within, not reliant on employees from Catholic Relief Services coming from the United States or Western Europe. We set up these programs, which do take funding and great amounts of resources to get started, but then we get to a point where we can step away and these programs can run themselves through the generous work of the people that are involved. This is a picture of one group of young people we met in a program called SOCI. The program is meant to help foster communication and dynamics in family systems. In Uganda, just in most places, family is so important. But many families, no matter where you are, experience difficulty at one time or another. Uganda has some very unique issues and cultural adaptations which we have to be aware of. For one, alcoholism is very rampant, and children and spousal abuse is also very common. It's not a shocking event in Ugandan culture, but this is one of the areas where Catholic Relief Services seeks to work with people to reduce that type of domestic violence. So in SOCI, what we have the young people do, along with their parents, is kind of role play. We have the kids take on the persons of a father, a mother, and the kid, and they work out communication, how to function properly in the domestic setting. You'll notice in this picture, the three boys are sitting in chairs, and the young lady is sitting on the floor. That's another cultural adaptation in Uganda. The men sit in chairs, the ladies sit on the floor. We just kind of have to work with people where they are. So these young people are pretending to be, if I remember correctly, young men who are having fun after work and neglecting their obligations to the home. And so the young lady, it's her job in this role to try to convince her husband, played by another student, to come back and be with her and the children. This is another picture of these young people in these unique roles, doing simple things like writing down household tasks and setting goals for themselves. These are just small ways that family units can begin to foster better communication and cooperation with themselves. Again, this program is not driven by or dependent on Americans coming over and working with them. We can set these programs up, but the idea is that we can then step away, and these programs can be run by those who need it most in these areas of Uganda. Another big part of Catholic Relief Services work in Africa and other places is developing financial resources for independence. In getting to speak with so many of the young people in Uganda, I'd asked them what they wanted to be when they grew up. And it was amazing how similar their answers were to the questions, or the same question I asked my young students at Sacred Heart Catholic School in El Reno. These young people want to become doctors and lawyers, nurses, hairstylists. They want to do all sorts of things. And this is good because we can reinforce the importance of education with them. Now, for many people, continuing education beyond very basic level is not really a possibility. So it's incumbent upon Catholic Relief Services and other organizations that work in the area to help them come up with some kind of trade, something that they like to do in order to make money. Now, to train somebody in a trade, whatever it is not too difficult. The real challenge is taking this person who's just learned a trade and then teach them the fundamentals of business. This young lady that we met runs her own fabric studio. In formal settings, the Ugandans love to dress up, and some of the most beautiful clothing I've ever seen. And so one of the programs that Catholic Relief Services does is teaches a young woman like this the basics of business etiquette, how to reinvest profit into the business, how to hire employees and deal with human resource issues, all these different things. Again, that takes time and energy. But when we have many of these young people trained in these sciences and these arts, which are so common throughout the United States, then they can teach others these same skills. And so instead of just teaching somebody a trade, we teach them how to make a living, how to make a life for themselves and their families. These are just two of the small programs that operate in Uganda. But really the heart of our trip overseas and our purpose for being there has to do with the Bidi refugee settlement. This is in the northern part of the nation of Uganda. And it's a sizable footprint as far as area on the map where this refugee settlement is. Right now, it's the second largest refugee settlement in the world, only recently being surpassed by the large refugee settlement in Bangladesh. Numbering 270,000 men, women, and children, mostly women and children, Bidi is itself a very large city in the middle of nowhere. To give you an idea of how large a number this is, the size of this refugee settlement is the same as the cities of Norman and Lawton and Altus combined. They've mostly come from the brand new nation of South Sudan, which only gained its independence in the year 2011. They've fled there since the year 2017. All because of a civil war that's being engaged right now in the nation of Southern Sudan. These people arrive on foot with next to no resources, money, barely the clothes on their back. And here, Catholic Relief Services, along with the United Nations and several other NGOs, have set up a settlement to house these folks for a very long time. The average stay in a refugee settlement in the world right now is 17 years. That means there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in Bidi. These were some of the young people that I met while I was there. We got to travel pretty loosely around the large compound. We didn't need escort for the most part. Communication was obviously very difficult in this setting. The children and most of their parents spoke no English. They speak a native dialect from the former nation of Sudan, which could then be translated into Swahili, which then could be translated into English. This is how we communicated, myself and the other delegates, and the young people that we encountered in the refugee settlement. They knew a few words in English, and they'd never seen a very large American man before that we know of. So I kind of took it upon myself to interact with them as best I could, and it was amazing the few words in English that they did pick up. So two things that happened that were very memorable. One is that I taught several hundred young people in this refugee settlement the quintessential American fist bump. They thought that was awesome. And to reward me for such a generous action, they gave me a nickname. They called me Red. I have no idea why. Now, what are the young people that are there? Naturally, one of the areas of concern for immediate work has to do with the education of these young people. The education has, for all intents and purposes, stopped the moment they fled their homeland. So, when the refugee settlement was first set up, most of the infrastructure there was quickly built and meant to be for very brief usage. This is a picture we took of the school. Nothing's really been changed. This is what it looked like. Now, term was not in session, but here's a picture of when it was. It's a very simple building, metal roof with timber for wall studs, and this very thick, strong, sturdy tarp that would wrap all the way around it. Well, it'd been there for a long enough time and probably been picked at by the kids. It's mostly gone away. This was the only education building in this part of the refugee settlement. So one of our first major engineering projects, building a school. Again, we weren't just going to show up and build a school for the people of Bidi Bidi refugee settlement. Instead, we supervised teaching their parents basic rules and ways of construction, all so that they could take this skill with them and carry it on with them elsewhere in life. So this is the new school under construction, simply being supervised by one of our long-term employees with Catholic Relief Services. This is a picture of the school when it was finished. Multiple classrooms. Windows aren't needed. The airflow was actually kept the temperature very pleasant the whole time, and a good deal of foresight put into construction of this building. Electricity is very much a rarity in this part of the nation, but the brand new school was wired so that it can have electricity for lights and fans and other necessities if and when that time arrives. This is that school in use today. It's a very different experience for the young people, much more conducive to learning. These gentlemen, standing along with one of our other volunteers with Catholic Relief Services, are the landlords in which that school exists. They're dressed very interestingly, almost militant, and they are, in fact, Muslim. They're long-term residents of the northern part of Uganda. And with the influx of refugees, these men were approached to open up their land to build a school, the school that we just saw. The response was as quick as it was beautiful. They're allowing Catholic Relief Services and other NGOs to establish these areas of infrastructure on their land free of charge. We asked them why they did this. And they explained to us that in this region, civil war and other strife is incredibly common. He says in their lifetime, these men right here had to flee northern Uganda 3 times, traveling north into Sudan, which is now South Sudan. At other times, South Sudanese would have to flee to Uganda. He says that they were very used to this fact of life. And while most of the refugees coming in from South Sudan are Christian, and most of the northern Ugandans are Muslim, they see in each other that basic humanity, that they needed assistance, and at this time, it was the South Sudanese fleeing for their lives. And he said, next time, it'll probably be us fleeing to the north. Very interesting encounter with these great people. Another great necessity we have in this refugee settlement is very basic housing. And I do mean very basic housing. This is an example of the home many people find themselves in. Single room, very simply constructed. little more than sticks planted in the ground, that same tarp that was covering the school. Here's one that's a little less nice. Catholic Relief Services, particularly our funds with Rice Bowl, does enable professional engineers and other experts in these kind of scientific and engineering fields to come over and supervise construction of basic necessities and other things for more long-term sustainable living. And so one of the men that we met there at the refugee settlement was named Elmer. He's a Filipino by nationality, married with several children, Roman Catholic, and very happy to be so. But his mission as a professional engineer is to come to places like Bidi Bidi and help establish basic housing and other infrastructure. This is the type of home he's helping people to build in Bidi Bidi. Again, a very simple structure, mud brick, but you can notice the Catholic Relief Service built homes, built with the people there, by the shiny white roof that's on top. The shiny metal costs a few dollars more, but it actually reduces the temperature inside the home by several degrees, making it that much more enjoyable to live in. You can kind of see on the left side of the picture a hut with a grass roof. Those are built by other charitable organizations, and they're not as popular as Catholic Relief Service buildings are. This is one of the homeowners that we met there, very proud to have a roof over her head. She knew she was receiving guests, us as dignitaries with Catholic Relief Services, so she wore the finest that she had in telling us about her experiences traveling from South Sudan. She was traveling with her husband, and she told us that just before she reached the border, an army truck pulled up beside them, soldiers got out, and executed her husband where he stood. Because of the danger of the situation, she had to leave him right there and continue walking south to safety in Uganda. Still traumatized by this event, she's very grateful to finally have a home over her head. This is another group of folks that welcomed us as dignitaries with Catholic Relief Services. Again, communication was very difficult, and it caused for some interesting interactions between us as Americans and they as South Sudanese refugees. But they're such a wonderful people, and they send their thanks and their message of hope to all of us here in the United States. This is just some of the work that Catholic Relief Services does overseas. This is one nation out of the more than 20 that Catholic Relief Services is involved in right now. So I thank you for your time and consideration in promoting the Rice Bowl with Catholic Relief Services. You can know that your money is going to a very worthy cause that's not existing simply to perpetuate itself. The work being done with Catholic Relief Services is meant to allow people to choose their own destiny and to be self-sufficient so they don't need our assistance anymore. God bless you all in this holy season of Lent. May God bless all those who receive the love and care of Catholic Relief Services.